The coffee had gone cold again. Lisa Martinez pushed the cup away from her workstation and rubbed her tired eyes. 3 years of monitoring deep space signals from Blackwater 7 had taught her that most nights were quiet. Too quiet. The outer rim station picked up cosmic radiation, distant star death cries, and the occasional merchant ship asking for travel directions. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. Lisa stretched in her chair and looked around the communications bay. Night shift was always the same. It's just her and the humming machines that listen to the universe. Her supervisor, Bill Turner, had gone to sleep hours ago, leaving her alone with the endless static that filled the space. Between stars, she was reaching for a cold coffee. When the alarm started screaming, the main display lit up like a Christmas tree. Incoming. Signal. Strong signal. Clean signal. Lisa's hands flew over controls, her heart suddenly pounding. In 3 years, she had never seen readings like this. The signal was coming from the Kepler 442 system. That was Zephyrian space. The blue-skinned aliens had been trading partners with Earth for 30 years. They were peaceful people who sold medicine and bought human art. Lisa had met a few Zephyrians at the station. They were polite and quiet with large dark eyes that seemed to hold old sadness. Lisa's fingers danced over the keyboard, trying to clean up the signal. Whatever was sending this message was using a lot of power. Transmission was so strong it cut through cosmic background noise like a knife through paper. Then the audio cleared and Lisa's blood turned to ice. The voice was speaking in Zephyrian, but the universal translator made the words clear as daylight. It was a female voice, young and terrified. This is Zafria Prime calling. Any ship, any fleet, any civilization that can hear this message. We are under attack. Pete, we are under attack. Unknown hostile forces have entered our system. They have already taken 3 of our outer colonies. Our defense fleet is destroyed. We have maybe 3 days before they reach our home world. The transmission crackled with static, then continued. We do not know who these attackers are. They call themselves the hegemony. They do not want to talk. They do not want a tribute. They take our people. They take them alive. And we do not know what happens after that. Our long-range sensors show a massive fleet, hundreds of ships, technologies we have never seen. Lisa sat frozen in her chair. The Zephyrians were calling for help. In 30 years of peaceful contact, they had never asked Earth for military aid. They barely had a military. Their whole society was built around healing and art and philosophy. The voice from Zephyria Prime continued, growing more desperate. We are sending this message on all emergency frequencies. We know most civilizations will not risk their fleets for us. We understand. We're asking anyway. If anyone can hear this, if anyone has ships that can fight, please help us. We have children here. Millions of children who have never heard anyone. Static filled the channel. For a moment, then the voice returned quieter now. We'll keep broadcasting this message until the end. Thank you for listening, says Zephyria Prime, signing off. Lisa stared at the display screen. Signal was still coming in, repeating the same desperate message, over and over. Her hands shook as she reached for the emergency communicator that would wake up every senior officer on the station. 5 minutes later, Supervisor Bill Turner burst into the communications bay, still, in his sleeping clothes. Behind him came Captain Ryan Brooks, the station's military liaison, and Dr. Nancy Clark, their alien relations expert. Play it. Again, Captain Brooks ordered. Lisa replayed the message. The 3 officers listened in silence. When it finished, Dr. Clark was the first to speak. The Zephyrians saved us during the Void Hunter crisis, she said quietly. Other civilizations in the galaxy turned their backs on Earth. The Zephyrians sent medical ships. They evacuated human refugees when everyone else said we were already dead. Captain Brooks nodded grimly. I remember my brother was on one of those refugee ships. The Zephyrians didn't have much, but they shared what they had. We need to contact Admiral Sullivan immediately. Turner said the Third Fleet is only 2 days out. From here, Lisa's fingers were already moving over the controls, opening a priority channel to the TDF Nemesis. Within minutes, the face of Admiral Jake Sullivan appeared on the main screen. The Admiral looked like he had been woken up, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Report," Sullivan said simply. Captain Brooks explained the situation quickly. As he talked, Lisa could see the Admiral's expression growing darker. Sullivan was an old soldier. 40 years in the Terran Defense Fleet. He had fought in the Void Hunter War when Earth itself had almost fallen. He knew what it meant to call for help and have no one answer. When Brooks finished, Admiral Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Extend me the full transmission. All of it. I want our best analysts to study every word, every background sound, every piece of data we can pull from that signal." "Sir," Captain Brooke said carefully, "the Zephyrian military is essentially non-existent. Their whole defense fleet is maybe 50 ships, and those are mostly converted cargo vessels. If this hegemony has hundreds of warships, double quotes." Admiral Sullivan's eyes hardened. "Captain, 30 years ago, the Zephyrians could have stayed safe in their own space. Instead, they risked their few ships to save human lives when no one else would. They didn't ask if we were worth saving. They didn't count the cost. They just came." The Admiral paused, looking at something off-screen. When he turned back, his face showed a decision had been made. Open a fleet-wide channel. All ships, all frequencies. Lisa's hands moved quickly over controls. Within seconds, every human ship within 3 star systems would be listening. Admiral Sullivan's voice filled the communication networks of human space. "This is Admiral Sullivan to all Terran Defense Fleet vessels and allied ships. We have received a distress call from the Zephyrian Republic. They're under attack by an unknown hostile force calling itself the Hegemony. The enemy fleet appears to be numerically superior and technologically advanced." The Admiral paused, letting that information sink in across the fleet. 30 years ago, when Earth faced extinction, the galaxy's great. Civilizations held conferences and debates while our cities burned. Only, the Zephyrians answered our call for help. Our small medical ships evacuated millions of human refugees when everyone else had written us off as dead. Another pause. Lisa could imagine a reaction aboard hundreds of human ships as crews. Remember that dark time in Earth's history. Zephyrians have 3 days before their homeworld falls. Military doctrine suggests we avoid engagement with a superior enemy force. Military doctrine can go to hell. Sullivan's voice grew harder, carrying the authority of a man who had commanded fleets in desperate battles. "All vessels, all fleets converge on Kepler 442. Plot course for maximum speed. We have a debt to pay, and we pay our debts in full. The Zephyrians saved us when we were the ones calling for help. Now, they're calling for help. And by God, we're going to answer." The transmission ended. For a moment, Communications Bay was silent except for the humming of machines. Then Lisa's display started lighting up again. Response signals from across human space. Ships changing course. Fleets abandoning patrol routes. Even civilian vessels volunteering to join the fleet heading toward Zephyrian space. Dr. Clark was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. "The Zephyrians think no one will answer their call." Captain Brooks checked his tactical display there. "Wrong. The monsters of Earth are coming." Outside the station, the first human ships were already jumping to hyperspace, racing toward battle that would test everything humanity had learned about being the galaxy's most dangerous species. The message from Admiral Sullivan spread through human space like wildfire. Within 6 hours, every major fleet commander had received new orders. Within 12 hours, civilian contractors were pulling cargo ships out of dock and welding weapon mounts onto their hulls. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of her flagship, the TDF Thunderbolt, watching her 4th Fleet change course toward the Kepler system. Her ships had been patrolling the Centauri corridor, keeping trade routes safe from pirates. Now they were, abandoning their post to answer a call for help from aliens most of her crew had never met. Admiral, communications officer called out. We're getting reports from across the fleet. Wait, the 5th and 6th fleets are also moving toward Kepler 442. Even some of the exploration ships from the outer reaches are coming. Morrison nodded. She had served under Sullivan during the Void Hunter War. She knew how the old man thought. Sullivan never forgot a debt, and he never left anyone behind who had stood with humanity in dark times. What about Earth Command? Asked. President Hayes has authorized Protocol 7, the officer replied. They're activating the Luna Arsenal. Morrison felt a chill run down her spine. Protocol 7 had been written after the Void Hunter War, when humanity realized they needed weapons that other species would be afraid to build. Weapons that went beyond the usual rules of civilized warfare. The Luna Arsenal had been sealed for 20 years. Its automated factories shut down and forgotten until now. On the other side of human space, Captain Nicole Adams was preparing her stealth squadron for the most dangerous mission of her career. Her 6 frigates were the fastest ships in the Terran fleet, designed to slip past enemy sensors and gather intelligence. Now, they would be the first human ships to reach the Kepler system. Remember, Adams told her, squadron commanders over the secure channel. We go in quiet and we stay quiet. Our job is to see what we're up against, not to start the fight early. Her ship, the TDF Shadow, dropped into hyperspace along with the other 5. Frig. They would reach Kepler 442 in 18 hours, a full day ahead of the main battle fleet. Whatever they found there would determine how the coming battle would be fought. Meanwhile, deep beneath the surface of Luna, machines that had been sleeping for 2 decades began to wake up. The Luna Arsenal covered 50 kilometers of underground factories, all of them automated, all of them designed to produce weapons that the Terran defense Council had classified as too dangerous for normal warfare. Dr. Henry Miller, Arsenal's chief engineer, walked through the main production facility with President Daniel Hayes. The president had flown out from Earth personally to oversee the activation of humanity's most secret weapons, the gravity. Disruptors will be ready in 6 hours, Dr. Miller explained as they passed an assembly line where robotic arms were, building devices that could crush a starship with artificial gravity fields. The temporal mines need another 12 hours. The neural scramblers are already finished. President Hayes stopped at an observation window that looked down into a factory producing something that looked like metallic spiders the size of fighter craft. What are those? Boarding pods, Miller said quietly. They cut through enemy hull armor and deploy assault teams directly into enemy ships. We developed them after studying Void Hunter technology. They're designed to cause maximum psychological impact on enemy crews. The president nodded grimly. During the Void Hunter War, humanity had learned that sometimes the only way to win was to be more terrifying than the enemy. The weapons being built in the Luna Arsenal weren't just designed to destroy ships. They were designed to break the will of anyone who faced them. Back in the Kepler system, Captain Adams and her stealth squadron dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. What they found made Adams wish she had stayed in normal space. The hegemony fleet was massive. Over 200 capital ships, each one larger than anything in the human fleet. Thousands of smaller vessels swarmed around the big ships like angry insects. And at the center of it all, 3 enormous vessels that defied description. They were so large that Adams' sensors couldn't get accurate readings on their size. God, whispered Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner from the bridge of the frigate. Whisper, how are we supposed to fight that? Adams studied the tactical display. The enemy fleet was positioned between the outer planets and Zephyr Prime. They were taking their time methodically, destroying the Zephyrian orbital stations and mining facilities. It looked like they were harvesting something from each facility before moving on to the next target. Send a tight beam transmission back to Admiral Sullivan, Adams ordered. Full tactical data. He needs to know what he's bringing the fleet into. As her communications officer worked to compile the data, Adams continued studying the enemy fleet, and there was something wrong with the ships. They didn't match each other in design. Some looked like they were built for speed, others for heavy assault. It was like the hegemony had taken ships from dozens of different species and welded them into one fleet. Then Adams saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the smaller enemy ships was docking with the Zephyrian mining station. Through her ship's powerful telescopes, she could see figures being moved from the station to the enemy ship. They were alive. The hegemony wasn't just conquering the Zephyrians. They were taking prisoners. Give me a closer look at that, Adams ordered. The shadow crept closer to the mining station, using its stealth systems to avoid detection. What Adams saw through the telescopes would haunt her for the rest of her life. The Zephyrians weren't being taken as prisoners. They were being processed, sorted into groups, loaded onto different types of ships like cargo. They're not conquering Adams. Whispered, they're harvesting. On Zaporia Prime, Prime Minister stood in the Planetary Defense Center, watching the enemy fleet slowly work its way through the outer system. His defense fleet was gone. His orbital weapons platforms were destroyed. In less than 2 days, the hegemony would reach his homeworld, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. Sir, his communications officer said, we're still receiving response signals to our distress call. Velter looked up with tired eyes. How many? Just one, sir. Humans are coming. Beltar felt his heart sink. He was grateful that someone had answered, but the humans had maybe 50 ships in their entire fleet against 200 enemy vessels. They would be slaughtered. Send a message to the human fleet, Velter ordered. Tell them we appreciate their response, but they should not sacrifice themselves for us. Tell them to stay away. Communications officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, we tried that. The human Admiral Sullivan sent back a one-word reply. What did he say? He said, no. Despite everything, Velter found himself smiling. During the Void Hunter crisis, when every other civilization had abandoned Earth to its fate, the Zephyrians had sent their few medical ships to help evacuate human refugees. The humans had never forgotten that kindness. No, facing impossible odds, they were coming to return the favor. Beltar walked to the Defense Center's main display, which showed the approaching enemy fleet. In 36 hours, those ships would be in orbit around his world. But somewhere in hyperspace, human ships were racing toward them. Maximum speed. The humans called themselves the monsters of Earth. Beltar had never understood that name. Humans seemed like any other species. They traded, they explored, they built colonies and raised families. But during the Void Hunter War, when Earth was burning and human cities were falling, something had awakened in the human species. Something dark and dangerous and absolutely ruthless. Other species fought wars to win territory or resources. Humans fought wars to protect the things they cared about. And once a human decided you were worth protecting, they would do anything to keep you safe, even if it meant becoming something terrible. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. Admiral Sullivan's voice filled the defense center. The human commander sounded calm, almost casual. Prime Minister, this is Admiral Sullivan of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your message suggesting we stay away. With respect, we're going to ignore that suggestion. The Zephyrians answered our call for help when no one else would. Now you've called for help and we're coming. Hold your position and keep your people safe. We'll be there soon. The transmission ended. Velter stared at the communication console, feeling something he hadn't felt in days. Hope outside. Zephyria. Prime's atmosphere. The enemy fleet continued its slow advance, but racing toward them through hyperspace came every warship humanity could gather. They were outnumbered 3-1. Their technology was older and less advanced. By every measure of military science, they were flying into a battle. They could not win, but they were coming anyway, 'cause that's what humans did. When someone they cared about called for help, they answered. No matter what the cost, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, like a storm breaking over calm water. 237 ships materialized in formation, their weapons already, charging in their shields at full power. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of the TDF Nemesis, studying the tactical display that showed the enemy positions. Captain Adams had done her job well. Intelligence from her stealth squadron painted a clear picture of what they were facing. The hegemony fleet was massive, well-armed, and positioned to defend their harvesting operations around Zephyria Prime. "Sir," called out Commander Tony Garcia from the tactical station, "enemy fleet is moving to intercept. They're forming a battle line between us and the planet." Sullivan nodded. The hegemony was doing exactly what any civilized military force would do. They were positioning their largest ships in a defensive formation, preparing for a traditional fleet engagement. Line against line, capital ship against capital ship, the way space battles had been fought for centuries. All ships Sullivan broadcast on the fleet frequency: execute Predator, protocol, break formation, and engage independent targeting. Across the human fleet, ship commanders smiled grimly. Predator protocol was something the Terran Defense Fleet had developed during the Void Hunter War. Instead of fighting like a civilized military, they would fight like what they were: the descendants of Earth's apex predators. The human fleet scattered like a pack of wolves breaking apart to surround prey. Instead of one large formation, they became dozens of smaller hunting groups, each one operating independently with its own targets and tactics. The first age-many ships to die never saw what killed them. Captain Ben Taylor's stealth squadron had been waiting in the outer system, their ships hidden in the shadow of dead asteroids. As the enemy fleet moved toward the main human force, Taylor's ships emerged from hiding and struck at the hegemony's rear guard. The stealth ships didn't try to fight fair. They targeted engine sections and weapon arrays with surgical precision, crippling enemy vessels before disappearing back into the darkness. Within 10 minutes, 6 hegemony cruisers were drifting helplessly while their crews tried to restore power. But Taylor wasn't done. The ships carried more than just weapons. They carried boarding teams. Lieutenant Sarah Kim led the first assault team through the torn hull of a disabled hegemony cruiser. Her Marines moved through the enemy ship like ghosts, their combat suits designed to terrify as much as protect. The suits were black as space with glowing red sensors that looked like demon eyes in the darkness. The hegemony crew had never faced anything like human boarding tactics. Most civilized species fought ship-to-ship battles at long range, didn't send soldiers crawling through enemy vessels with weapons that could punch through bulkheads like paper. Sarah's team moved through the cruiser systematically, not just fighting the crew, but broadcasting the sounds of battle on all frequencies. Every hegemony ship could hear the screams, the explosions, the terrifying efficiency of human soldiers doing what they did best. "Bridge secured," Sarah reported over the comm. Enemy crew has surrendered, re-downloading their tactical database. Now, similar scenes played out across the battle zone as human boarding teams hit one disabled ship after another. But the real shock came when the main human fleet engaged the hegemony battle line. The enemy expected a traditional engagement, heavy ships trading fire at maximum range until one side's shields failed. Instead, the humans did something that made seasoned hegemony commanders question their understanding of warfare. Commander Linda Foster's heavy cruiser relentless charged straight at the enemy flagship, her shields overloading under the concentrated fire of 20 enemy vessels. Any sane captain would have pulled back when her armor started, failing. Instead, Foster kept coming. All hands prepare for ramming speed. Foster announced to her crew, "We're going to show these bastards how humans say hello." Relentless slammed into the hegemony flagships docking bay at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact tore through both ships, but Foster's crew was ready. They had spent the last minutes of their approach, sealing themselves into combat armor and preparing for the most brutal kind of fighting humanity had perfected. Ship 2. Ship combat inside a damaged vessel, with no rules and no mercy. Meanwhile, Admiral Morrison's Fourth Fleet is demonstrating another human innovation that the galaxy's civilized species found disturbing. Instead of trying to match the enemy's firepower, they were using their own ships as weapons. "All ships execute Sullivan's gambit," Morrison ordered. Across her fleet, captains began plotting collision courses with enemy dreadnoughts. But these weren't suicide runs. At the last possible moment, human crews would evacuate in armor pods while their ships, guided by artificial intelligence, rammed into enemy vessels at relativistic speeds. The tactic was brutal, wasteful, and completely effective. A human frigate moving at near light speed could crack a dreadnought whole like an eggshell. The fact that humans were willing to sacrifice their own ships to achieve victory sent a clear message to the hegemony fleet. These weren't civilized opponents. These were predators willing to pay any price to protect what they considered theirs. But the real terror began when the Luna arsenal weapons arrived. The first gravity disruptors activated around the largest hegemony vessels. Space itself began to twist and bend as artificial gravity fields crushed enemy ships like tin cans. Hegemony crews found themselves pressed against bulkheads by forces that made their bones crack and their organs rupture. The temporal mines were worse. When they detonated near enemy formations, time itself became a weapon. Hegemony ships found their hulls aging decades and seconds, their metal turning to rust in their systems, failing as entropy accelerated around them. And then came the neural scramblers. These weapons had been built after studying Void Hunter technology. It's designed to attack the minds of enemy crews directly. When they activated, hegemony soldiers found themselves overwhelmed by waves of terror and confusion. Some forgot how to operate their weapons. Others became convinced that their own crewmates were enemies. The psychological impact was devastating. The hegemony had conquered dozens of species using superior technology and overwhelming force. But they had never faced an enemy that fought to break their minds as well as their ships. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, monitoring communications from the TDF Whisper, listened to the enemy transmissions with growing amazement. The hegemony fleet was falling apart not just from human weapons but from fear. Sir Turner reported to Captain Adams. The enemy is trying to retreat. 3 of their battle groups are pulling back toward the outer system. Adams smiled coldly. Send word to Admiral Sullivan. We've got them running scared. But Admiral Sullivan wasn't finished. Human fleet had scattered the enemy formations and crippled dozens of their ships. Now came the part that would cement humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. The hunt, human ships, pursued the retreating hegemony vessels like wolves chasing wounded prey. There would be no mercy, no quarter given, no prisoners taken from the ships that had been harvesting Zephyr and civilians. Every enemy vessel that had participated in the slaughter would be destroyed. Captain Ryan Brooks, commanding a squadron of destroyers, cornered a fleeing hegemony cruiser near the system's asteroid belt. The enemy ship was damaged and trying to hide among the rocks, but Brooks' ships had sensors designed to track stealth-dead targets. Target acquired. Brooks announced to the squadron, "Light them up." The destroyers opened fire with everything they had, not just energy weapons and missiles, but the new molecular disruptors from the Luna arsenal. The enemy ship didn't just explode. It came apart at the atomic level, its hull dissolving into component elements across the battle zone. Similar scenes played out as human ships systematically hunted down every hegemony vessel they could find. The enemy had expected a civilized engagement with rules and honor. Instead, they found themselves facing an entire species that had weaponized its own survival instincts. On Zephyr, Prime Minister watched the battle through his defense center sensors. What he saw would change his understanding of humanity forever. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to send a message to every hostile species in the EP galaxy. This is what happens when you threaten something humanity cares about. The Hegemony fleet, which had seemed invincible just hours before, was breaking apart under the human assault. Ships were fleeing in all directions, their crews more interested in survival than conquest. The harvesting operations around Zaporia Prime had stopped completely as the enemy focused on trying to escape the human predators that hunted them through space. But the humans weren't done yet. Admiral Sullivan had one more surprise for the Hegemony fleet, something that would ensure this battle would be remembered throughout the galaxy as the day. The monsters of Earth showed everyone what they were truly capable of. The battle had been raging for 16 hours, and the space around Zaporia Prime looked like a graveyard. Burning ships drifted in the darkness there, hulls torn open by weapons that turned metal into dust. The Hegemony fleet was scattered and broken, but they were far from defeated. Their 3 massive command ships still hung in space like metal mountains. Coordinating what remained of their forces, Admiral Sullivan studied the tactical display with tired eyes. His fleet had performed beyond his wildest expectations, but the cost was starting to show. 23 human ships had been destroyed, their crews dead or missing. Hundreds more were damaged, their weapons running low and their shields failing. But the enemy was hurt worse. Over 60 Hegemony vessels had been destroyed or crippled. The survivors were pulling back toward their command ships, forming a defensive sphere around the massive vessels that seemed to be the heart of their fleet. Sir, Commander Garcia reported from a station. We're getting strange readings from those big ships. They're not just command vessels. They're something else. Sullivan moved to Garcia's station and looked at the sensor data. The 3 command ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. Oh, but the readings showed something disturbing. There were massive life signs inside those ships. Thousands of life signs. Be millions. They're not warships. Sullivan realized with growing horror. They're prison ships. Those are all the people they've harvested from conquered worlds. The realization hit the human fleet like a physical blow. The Hegemony wasn't just conquering civilizations. They were taking entire populations prisoner and keeping them alive inside those massive vessels. For what purpose? Nobody wanted to guess. Captain Linda Foster, still fighting her way through the corridors of the enemy flagship she had rammed, heard the news over her system. Her ship, the Relentless, was a broken wreck fused with the enemy vessel, but her crew was still fighting room by room through the Hegemony ship. All teams Foster broadcast to her Marines' new priority. We need to find out what they're doing with the prisoners. Get me access to their main computer. Sergeant Pete Wilson, leading one of the boarding teams, kicked down a door that led to what looked like the ship's data center. Inside, dozens of alien technicians were frantically trying to destroy computer files. Wilson's team opened fire, not to kill, but to stop them from erasing the data. Computer secured, Wilson reported. But, sir, you need to see this. What Wilson had found made Foster's blood run cold. The Hegemony computer files contained detailed records of every species they had conquered. Billions of people, all cataloged like livestock. The files showed that the prisoners were being processed, their biological and mental characteristics studied and recorded. They were building something, some kind of massive biological weapon that used the genetic material and brain patterns of conquered species. Prison ships weren't just holding cells. They were laboratories. Foster immediately transmitted the data to Admiral Sullivan. When the Admiral saw the files, his face went white with rage. All ships Sullivan broadcast on. The fleet frequency, new priority. Those command ships contain millions of prisoners from conquered worlds. We cannot use heavy weapons against them. This is now a rescue mission. Across the human fleet, ship commanders felt their hearts sink. Fighting warships was one thing. Trying to capture vessels, the Size of small moons filled with prisoners who would die if the ships were destroyed was almost impossible. But then Lieutenant Karen Miller, commanding the experimental vessel Phantom, spoke up on the tactical. "Channel, Admiral, I have an idea. It's crazy, but it might work." Miller was 25 years old. It had been given command of the Phantom only because she was the only pilot skilled enough to handle its experimental systems. The ship was equipped with a prototype consciousness disruption weapon designed to attack the collective intelligence that seemed to coordinate hegemony fleet movements. The enemy fleet operates through some kind of shared mental link, Miller explained. If I can get close enough to their command ships with the consciousness disruptor, I might be able to sever that link. Without coordination, the remaining ships should be easy to pick off. Admiral Sullivan understood immediately what she was suggesting. The Phantom would have to fly directly into the heart of the enemy formation, surrounded by hundreds of enemy weapons. It would be suicide, Lieutenant, Sullivan said carefully. That weapon is untested. Well, we don't know what kind of range it has or what it might do to you when it fires. Miller's voice was steady when she replied, "Sir, my parents died in the Void Hunter War. They were on one of the colony ships that the Zephyrians evacuated. I owe them this." Respond. Miller was already moving. The Phantom broke away from the main human formation and accelerated toward the enemy command ships at maximum speed. The remaining hegemony vessels opened fire immediately. Energy beams and missile swarms filled the space around the small experimental ship. Miller pushed her engines beyond safe limits, dodging to the fire with skills that made her fellow pilots hold their breath. "Phantom to all ships," Miller broadcast as she raced towards certain death. "Tell my parents I chose to be the monster they needed." The Phantom took hit after hit as it closed with the enemy command ships. Its shields failed, then its armor began to melt under the concentrated fire, but Miller kept flying, her ship leaving a trail of debris and atmosphere as it came apart around her. Inside, one of the command ships, the hegemony commanders, watched in disbelief as the tiny human vessel continued its suicide run, no rationale being with sacrifice themselves for strangers. No civilized species would throw away lives for abstract concepts like honor or debt, but humans weren't rational. They definitely weren't civilized. The Phantom reached the center of the enemy formation just as its hull began to buckle. Miller activated the consciousness disruptor with her last breath, sending a wave of psychic energy through the collective mind that bound the hegemony fleet together. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the enemy formation, ships suddenly stopped coordinating their movements. Captains who had been sharing thoughts and tactics through their collective consciousness found themselves alone in their own minds for the first time in centuries. Some hegemony ships immediately began attacking each other, their individual commanders, unable to tell friend from enemy without the collective to guide them. Others simply shut down as their crews succumbed to psychic shock. The three massive command ships, which had been the center of the collective consciousness, went dark. Their weapons stopped firing. Their engines stopped running. They began to drift in space like dead whales. Admiral Sullivan watched the enemy fleet tear itself apart and felt something he hadn't experienced since the Void Hunter War. Hope mixed with grief. Miller's sacrifice had broken the enemy, but the cost was almost too much to bear. All ships, Sullivan ordered, begin rescue operations on the command ships. Get boarding teams over there and find those prisoners. And somebody find out if Lieutenant Miller survived that blast. Across the human fleet, ships began moving toward the drifting command vessels. The battle was won, but the hardest part was just beginning. Inside those massive ships were millions of people from dozens of conquered worlds. They had been prisoners for years, maybe decades. Many would be broken in body and mind, but they would be free. Colonel Peter Hayes led the first boarding team onto the largest command ship. What he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his life. Endless corridors lined with prison cells, each one containing beings from species he had never seen before. Most were barely alive, kept in conditions that made concentration camps look humane. Medical teams to all decks Hayes broadcast. We've got millions of prisoners here, and most of them need immediate care. The rescue operation would take days. The human fleet had won the battle, but now they faced the enormous task of caring for survivors from dozens of worlds. Many of the prisoners didn't even remember their home planets. Some had been born in captivity and had never seen sunlight. But as Hayes worked his way through the prison levels, he began to understand something that made the sacrifice worthwhile. These weren't just random prisoners. Hegemony had been systematically conquering every peaceful species in this part of the galaxy. If they hadn't been stopped here, they would have continued their harvest until every free world was consumed. The Zephyrians hadn't just been calling for help for themselves, and they'd been calling for help for everyone. And the monsters of Earth had answered. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Sullivan stood in the medical bay of the converted cargo ship Haven, watching Zephyrian doctors work alongside human medics to treat prisoners who had been held by the hegemony for years. The scene should have been hopeful, but Sullivan felt only a deep weariness that came from seeing too much suffering. The final count was staggering. The 3 hegemony command ships had contained over 4 million prisoners from 37 different species. Most were barely alive when the rescue teams found them. Many had been subjected to experiments that left them broken in body and mind. Some had been prisoners so long they no longer remembered their own names. Admiral Dr. Nancy Clark approached him with a tablet full of medical reports. We've identified survivors from the Kepler system, the vegan colonies, and at least 20 other worlds we thought had been completely destroyed. The hegemony wasn't just conquering these places. They were strip mining entire civilizations. Sullivan nodded grimly. The human fleet had spent 3 weeks moving survivors to temporary medical facilities, coordinating with alien governments to identify and repatriate prisoners and try and understand the full scope of what they had uncovered. The hegemony had been operating for over 50 years, slowly consuming every peaceful species they encountered. What about the hegemony survivors? Sullivan asked. We found about 300 of them still alive. On the command ships, Clark replied. Most are in shock from losing their collective consciousness. They keep asking for their voices back. The hegemony. It turned out it's been a hive mind species that had augmented themselves with technology from conquered civilizations. Lieutenant Miller's weapons severed their collective consciousness. It had left the survivors as isolated individuals for the first time in their lives. Many had simply shut down, unable to function without the shared thoughts that had guided them for centuries. A few had tried to communicate with their human captors. What they revealed painted a picture of a species that had started as explorers and gradually become predators, consuming other civilizations to feed their collective growth. They spoke of the absorbed knowledge and experiences of billions of conquered beings, all stored within their shared consciousness. Now that consciousness was gone, shattered by a human weapon that had turned their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Captain Adams, whose stealth ships had provided the intelligence that made victory possible, found Sullivan on the observation deck of the Haven. Together, they watched as shuttle after shuttle carried freed prisoners to hospital ships and temporary shelters. Other species are calling it the Kepler miracle, Adams said. Every major government in the galaxy is sending representatives to thank us. Sullivan snorted. They're not thanking us. They're trying to figure out how dangerous we've become. He was right. The Battle of Kepler 442 had sent shock waves through the galactic community. Humanity had deployed weapons that other species considered too dangerous to build. They had fought with brutality that shocked civilized observers. Most disturbing of all, they had done it to protect aliens they barely knew. The major powers were scrambling to understand what this meant for the balance of power in the galaxy. Some were already increasing their military budgets. Others were quietly reaching out to Earth, hoping to secure human protection for their own worlds. Prime Minister, Velter wants to speak with you, Adams said, handing Sullivan a communication pad. The Zephyrian leader appeared on the screen, looking older than he had just a month ago. The siege of his world and the revelations about the hegemonies. True nature had taken their toll. Admiral Sullivaner began. I wanted to thank you personally before the memorial service begins. Sullivan had almost forgotten. Today was the day they would honor the human crews who had died in the battle, whose sacrifice had broken the enemies. Collective mind. You don't need to thank us, Sullivan replied. We're returning a favor. Belter was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that. 30 years ago, when we sent our medical ships to help evacuate Earth, our council debated for days about whether to get involved. We were afraid. We knew that helping you might make us enemies of whoever was attacking your world. The Zephyrin leader paused, his large dark eyes reflecting old pain. But we decided that fear was not a good enough reason to let innocent people die. We sent our ships anyway, even though we knew it might bring danger to our own people. Sullivan understood where this was going. I see that you made the same choice. Velter continued. You came here knowing you might not win. You came knowing it would cost you ships and lives. You came because someone called for help. And you remembered what it felt like when nobody answered your call. The memorial service was held in space with the entire human fleet, arranged in formation at around a small monument that had been constructed from pieces of destroyed hegemony ships. Representatives from dozens of alien governments attended their ships, maintaining a respectful distance as Admiral. Sullivan read the names of the human dead. When he reached Karen Miller's name, Sullivan paused. The young pilots. Sacrifice had saved millions of lives and ended a threat that had been consuming civilizations for decades. But all Sullivan could think about were the parents who would never see their daughter again. Lieutenant Karen Miller, Sullivan said into the silence of space, who chose to be the monster the universe needed. After the service, Sullivan returned to his quarters aboard the Nemesis. He found a message waiting for him from Earth Command. President Hayes had decided to establish a permanent human presence in the Kepler system. The new base would be called Kepler Defense Station, but everyone already knew what the crews would call it, Monsters Denver. The name had started as a joke among the human fleet, but it had spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Within days, it appeared on star charts, published by every major civilization, not as a warning to stay away, but as a reminder of what happened when the monsters of Earth decided to protect something. A month later, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of her new command ship, watching construction crews work on the defense station. The facility was being built from salvaged hegemony technology, its weapons and sensors more advanced than anything in the human fleet. Admiral, her communications officer, called out, "We're receiving a distress signal from the Tidy system. The Altrian colonies are under attack by unknown hostiles." Morrison smiled grimly. The Altarians had been neutral during the Void Hunter War, refusing to help Earth, even when human refugees had begged for sanctuary. But neutrality was a luxury that the galaxy could no longer afford. "Signal. The fleet," Morrison ordered. "Asset course for Tidy. Looks like someone else needs to learn what happens when you call for help and the monsters of Earth answer." The human fleet began, moving toward another crisis. Another species that had discovered they lived in a dangerous universe. But this time, they wouldn't have to face it alone, because humanity had learned something important during their own dark years. Sometimes being the hero meant becoming the monster that other monsters feared. On Earth, a new monument was being built. In the center of Geneva, where the old United DS Nations building had once stood, would honor all the humans who had died in the Battle of Kepler 442. But its inscription would carry a different message. The stone would read, "They answered the call, knowing the cost. They chose to be what the universe needed, not what it wanted." Below that, in smaller letters are the coordinates of every world where human ships patrol the darkness between stars. A promise to anyone who might someday need help. Monsters of Earth were listening, and they would always answer the call.